We have no idea what mysteries lurk in the most recondite places of our world, but it's becoming increasingly clear that you can never know what to expect. From churches sitting solemnly in the sky to abandoned communist fortresses. Here are the 15 strangest things found in the middle of nowhere. Number 15. The Killer's Castle. Walking along Scotland's unspoiled northeast coast, one doesn't expect to find much. But near the village of Cruden Bay, against the isolated landscape, stands a single castle that holds a great story. Known as Slane Castle, it was built in the 16th century and was once a grand residence for an earl, but fell into neglect in the 19th century and now stands as an eerie ruin of the grandeur it once held. It is known for its haunting and eerie appearance and has served as an inspiration to many writers and artists. But brave urban explorers have tried for many years to venture into the eerie ruins. In its heyday, the castle had marble staircases, large bedrooms and reception rooms, and even stables. But now, it is a shell of its former self, an eerie reminder of the past that still haunts these halls. Those who have dared to explore this spooky castle have attested to glimpsing movement out of the corner of their eyes and feeling a palpable suspense. The very air of Slane Castle seems charged with a malevolent energy, and one feels as if one is being watched by unseen eyes, making one understand why it was the inspiration for Bram Stoker's Dracula, which became one of the most haunting horror stories in history. The octagonal rooms match the description of Bram Stoker's Dracula, and even just seeing the skeleton of the castle that once was, it's easy to see how this spooky castle could have inspired these horror stories. Number 14. Moynak Cemetery. The Moynak Ship Cemetery is an eerie and spooky place located in Moynak, a city in Uzbekistan. Once a thriving fishing port on the Aral Sea, Moynak is now hundreds of kilometers from the receding sea, which has left behind a barren and desolate landscape that makes it one of the most interesting places in the middle of nowhere. The boat graveyard is a collection of rusting and decaying boats and fishing vessels that were abandoned when the sea began to recede in the 1960s due to overexploitation of its water resources and irresponsible government. As the sea receded, the ships were left stranded in the desert, slowly rusting under the harsh sun and wind. Now mere skeletons of seafaring ships, the ship graveyard is a haunting reminder of the environmental devastation caused by human activities. The rusting hulks of the ships stand in stark contrast to the arid desert landscape, and their silent presence seems to bear witness to the tragedy that has been unleashed on this once bustling port. The rusting hulls of the ships and boats seem frozen in time, as if waiting for the return of the sea that will never come. The rusted metal creaks in the wind, and the silence is broken only by the occasional rustle of desert plants and the occasional bird. The Moynak ship graveyard is sobering evidence of the fragility of our planet and the consequences of our actions. It is a place that leaves a lasting impression on the many tourists who visit this eerie place and serves as a poignant symbol of the impact humans can have on the natural world. Number 13. Fort Boyard. Downtown Yoshim is the last place one would expect to find a striking, groundbreaking structure. But as you stroll along the west coast of France, you may spot the ruins of the once long-awaited Fort Boyard, a structure that was supposed to defy all. Built under Napoleon in the 17th century, this structure was initially supposed to be a prison, but not long after the military turned its attention to the endless possibilities of this outlet to the sea, construction of the fort was halted for many years. And although Napoleon's forces planned to load the structure with cannons to defend the coast, this was never realized, and the whole project was eventually deemed a complete failure. It has now fallen into decay, and for a long time was a hotspot for looters and thieves who took whatever they could. Building Fort Boyard was an immensely difficult challenge, and the fact that the structure managed to come into being and hold up against the forces of nature is spectacular. 200 years after Napoleon began construction of this crazy structure, it was the site of an interesting and exciting game show held just inside Fort Boyard. But now, it simply stands as a relic of a distant past on the French coast. This massive structure is certainly one of the things one would never expect to find, but it proves that logistical problems were not a problem for military forces in the past. And although it ultimately failed, Fort Boyard is one of the most impressive structures ever built. Number 12. Miracle Lake. The Miracle Lake in Gafsa, Tunisia, is a very strange phenomenon that was spotted in the middle of the vast and isolated desert, and the first person who came across this lake thought it was a mirage. The news spread quickly among the locals, who embraced the lake as a much-needed escape from the oppressive heat. But all was not as clear as it seems. No one could figure out where this lake came from, as one day the area was as dry as can be, and the next a gigantic lake would appear out of nowhere. Many believed it was water coming up from underground and was a gift, while others feared the lake had a more sinister origin story, perhaps man-made. Despite warnings, people dived and swam in this lake to their heart's content. But many wary locals believed that the lake's water was radioactive and contained many diseases and harmful chemicals. When the lake first appeared, it was filled with completely clear turquoise water that looked like it was straight out of paradise. But it quickly turned green and murky, showing that the water was becoming completely stagnant. However, the sudden appearance of the lake and its subsequent disappearance a few months later has led to speculation about its origins and unusual nature. And it remains one of the biggest mysteries that we have not been able to solve to this day. Finding a gigantic lake in the interior of an arid desert is quite unheard of, and this is the first we've heard of such a thing. Spooky, isn't it? For now, let's continue with more unusual things found in the middle of nowhere. Number 11. Dolphin graves, on the tiny island of Chapelle Dom Hue in the English Channel. One of the strangest and most puzzling archaeological mysteries we have ever seen has been discovered. The island has shown absolutely no sign of human habitation in its past, with no skeletons or artifacts found. One day, the discovery of a tomb changed all this. By all appearances, archaeologists seem to have discovered a tomb made by ancient humans, and the whole world held its breath. What they found was not an ancient human skeleton. It was something far more mysterious. Tests revealed that the tomb contained the bones of a dolphin that probably swam in these same oceans thousands of years ago. No historical record shows any such marine mammal burials. And even more puzzling, we have no idea why or who was behind this. It is believed that the island was briefly inhabited by Christian monks at one time, but no concrete evidence of this has been found. This has been the first and only dolphin burial that has been found. And while it is possible that the ancient inhabitants of this site may have eaten dolphins, it does not explain the effort to create a human-looking burial for the marine mammal. Excavations at this site revealed one of the most puzzling things ever found in the middle of nowhere, and we still have no real clue why these ancient dolphins were buried so carefully. Number 10. Ghost Church. People usually go to church to pray away ghosts, but this strange church in the Czech Republic is full of ghosts. They hauntingly fill the pews at the top of a lonely winding road in Lakova. St. George's Church was built in 1352, but after part of the roof collapsed during a funeral, the fearful locals abandoned the church. They were so frightened by the ominous event that no one set foot in the church again for hundreds of years. And by the time modern people re-entered it, it was nothing more than a crumbling relic of its long past. A few years ago, a student and artist, Jakub Hadraba, visited the church and was captivated by this haunting abandoned church that told the stories of many centuries on its crumbling facade. Inspired not to let it fade into history, he devised a way for the church to once again be filled with praying souls. Although the fearful locals still refused to come near, he carefully crafted a whole collection of curtain-covered ghostly figures to sit in the church pews forever. The ghostly statues dotting the church have saved it from falling into nothingness, and it is now a fairly popular tourist site that many people from all over the world travel far and wide to see. The church had survived complete neglect and several fires throughout its lonely life. The ghostly church has stood for hundreds of years, and at least now it is no longer alone in the middle of nowhere. Number 9. Breath of the Desert. The scorching sun hides behind the distant sand dunes. The desert landscape is transformed into an eerie realm of shadows and darkness. At the heart of this barren wasteland lies a haunting work of art known as desert breath. Spiral sand cones rise like ominous protrusions from the ground, their sharp points stretching skyward. The structure is made by alternating inward-pointing cones and inverted cones dug into the sand. The desert breath is located in the arid landscape next to the Red Sea, and unfortunately, due to its completely remote location, it is much easier to see it on Google Earth than in real life. The project was completed in 1997, with gigantic machinery working around the clock to move over 280,000 cubic feet of sand and create the spiral structure. At its center used to be a large pool of water, but since there was no feasible way to keep it filled, it has long since evaporated. The sand cones are completely at the mercy of the natural forces of the desert, which is why their shape is slowly changing. The entire installation was an artistic effort by a Greek team, and the idea behind it was exactly this. The gradual shifting of the sands of desert breath was meant to represent the slow passage of time and the impermanence of the world around us. It spans over 1 million square feet and is one of the most magnificent and impressive structures we have left in the middle of nowhere. But one day, it will have faded back into nothingness. Number 8. Khachgi Pillar. The Khachgi Pillar, also known as the Khachgi Column, is a natural limestone monolith located in a remote region of Georgia. It stands approximately 130 feet tall and is situated on a hill overlooking the Khachkura River. Its history has made it one of the most interesting places you will find in the middle of nowhere. The pillar is considered a sacred place by the locals and has been used for religious purposes since ancient times. In the 6th century, a small church dedicated to the St. Simeon Stylites was built on the pillar and used as a place of religious retreat. The church remained in use until the 13th century, after which the place was abandoned. It is now used as a daily prayer church for monks living in the area, but no one lives on top of the monolith anymore. The monks have to make the dangerous ascent every day, but only very select religious are allowed to do so. And in the entire history of its existence, no woman has ever been allowed to climb to the top. It is widely known as the loneliest church in the world, and we can clearly see why. The Khachgi Pillar stands tall and imposing against the misty sky, and its ancient limestone surface is weathered and worn as if it holds the secrets of centuries past. Looking up to the top of the pillar, a small church can be seen shrouded in darkness. Whatever the reason it was built in this isolated location, it is clear that the pillar is a sacred and forbidden space that holds great power. Number 7. The mysterious stone structures of Saudi Arabia. There are actually several mysterious stone structures located in the desert of Saudi Arabia, many of which are known as mastatils. These are large rectangular structures believed to have been built by ancient peoples thousands of years ago, although their exact purpose and function remain a complete mystery to this day. As you travel through the arid landscape of Saudi Arabia, you'll find endless stretches of desert. But you will also find this series of mysterious stone structures. Rising from the earth like ancient guardians, their dark, weathered surfaces are etched with enigmatic symbols and glyphs whose meaning escapes us today. Mastodils are usually made of stone slabs and range in size from small enclosures to large, complex structures, covering an area of several hundred meters. Despite extensive study by archaeologists and other experts, the purpose of these structures remains a mystery. Some theories suggest that they may have been used for religious or ritual purposes, while others propose that they were used for astronomical observations. What is known is that the Mustangs provide a fascinating glimpse into Saudi Arabia's ancient past and continue to intrigue and captivate researchers and visitors alike. Many speculate on the origin of these ancient stones and whether alien involvement could be behind them, as it is completely baffling how an ancient race could have achieved such incredible architectural feats. Number 6. The Giant Hand. Deep in the arid landscape of the Atacama Desert lies a mysterious and otherworldly sight. A giant hand, made of parched earth and sand, extends from the ground as if reaching for the sky. The fingers are long and slender, almost ethereal in appearance, and seem to glow in the glowing desert sun. The sheer scale of the sculpture is intimidating, and there is something about the way it has been crafted that seems almost too perfect, too precise. It's as if the hand has been meticulously crafted to resemble a real human hand. And there's no denying the intensely detailed design. It's too big, too imposing, too unnatural, as if the rest of the giant is trapped underground, and only his lone hand protrudes above the ground. Despite its creepy appearance, the giant hand is actually a work of art. It is believed to have been made by a Chilean artist who used the vast expanse of the desert as a canvas. It is believed to represent the power and majesty of nature. as well as the fragile nature of humanity. Some say the giant hand has mystical powers, that it can grant wishes and offer protection to those who come before it. Others believe it is a warning, a reminder of the transience of human life and the power of the natural world. Whatever your belief, there is no comparison to the awe-inspiring sight of the giant hand in the Atacama Desert. It is a testament to the ingenuity and creativity of humankind, and a reminder of the strange and wonderful mysteries that still lurk deep in the world's most desolate places. Number 5. Holland Island's last home. Holland Island was once a vibrant fishing community where many people lived, making it one of the most populated islands in the Chesapeake Bay, where more than 60 houses once stood. Only one lone Victorian house remained, built in the 1880s on the isolated piece of land that still jutted out above the waves. Holland Island was named after its owner, Daniel Holland, a British colonialist. When the water levels began to rise considerably, most of Holland Island's inhabitants left as quickly as they arrived, and only a select number of people decided to try to stay on the island they called home when it was completely abandoned. The last Victorian house was the only remaining vestige of the island it once was, but eventually it too fell into ruin due to neglect and being left to the mercy of nature. A priest from a mainland church bought it in the 1950s and devoted endless efforts to try to save the small island from rising water levels. But in the end, all his efforts were sadly in vain. In 2010, the last of the land points that protruded above the water were finally submerged under the tide, and Holland Island is now only a memory. No one who had built their home and life on Holland Island ever thought they would have to abandon it all. But sadly, Holland Island's story did not end happily. And when it was still intact, the last house on Holland Island was one of the spookiest glimpses of the past that many people traveled to see. Number 4. The Cavern of Lost Souls. Walking through the remote Welsh countryside, it seems like there's not much more than endless grassy plains. But underground, there are many abandoned slate mines that have been completely forgotten for many years. Although it is never advisable to explore abandoned mines because of the obvious dangers, this did not stop brave explorers from discovering the Cavern of Lost Souls. The Cavern of Lost Souls is an abandoned mine that was supposed to be completely empty. But one day, when a person made his way inside, he discovered a great mystery. Inside the abandoned mine, they found an incredibly huge pile of old cars that had been dumped here. The only strange thing was that no one knew about it beforehand, and so it was thought that to avoid costs and legal proceedings, people all over the world just dumped their old cars instead of disposing of them. This went on for many years without anyone knowing, and resulted in the interior of the mine being piled up full of old cars that were dumped into a dark grave in this abandoned mine. Although the road to the cache of old cars is fraught with danger, and attempting to do so could be fatal, gasoline lovers care little about this, as their passion draws them to this abandoned dimension of old cars with incredible stories buried with them. There are at least 1,000 cars rusting away in this forgotten mine, making it one of the darkest, saddest, and most interesting things you can find in the middle of nowhere. Number 3. E.T.'s home phone. Many of us will remember the classic movie E.T. as fondly as we remember early video game cartridges and early video games. But unfortunately, this story brings a somewhat sad ending to both. For many years, it was rumored that the video game company Atari was getting rid of tons of old games, and it was finally confirmed. You shouldn't be surprised to walk through the New Mexico desert and find an alien. Rather than donate or dispose of a huge number of game cartridges, Atari opted to bury all of its stock of games that weren't doing so well in this desert. The video game giant eventually admitted that it had buried more than 750,000 cartridges, most of which were for the game adaptation of the famous movie E.T. This was a sad end to an unforgettable era of gaming. But about 10 years ago, the location where these classic games were buried was located, and community efforts quickly took hold to dig them up. Unfortunately, only about 1,300 cartridges were recovered, and the rest were condemned to eternity in this video game graveyard. They were sold to raise money for an Atari museum. But as you might expect, there is a great deal of nostalgia associated with this find that reminds us of a simpler time. Truckloads of this game were taken to an excavated grave in New Mexico, and this singular defining event became known as the Great Video Game Burial of 1983. Number 2. Sahara Desert Circles. Despite what we have always thought, the Sahara Desert is not just an endless expanse of sand and heat. And while you may want to avoid the powerful sandstorms as much as possible, there are actually many mysterious and puzzling things to find in this remote desert. Classic movies like The Mummy have always given rise to the fantasy that incredibly ancient relics and powerful artifacts could be hidden beneath the dunes, but even stranger things can be found in the Sahara Desert. Google Earth enthusiasts have a keen eye for spotting irregular objects and formations in the most remote places on Earth. And since one person spotted these strange circles in plain sight on the floor of the Sahara Desert, news of this eerie phenomenon spread like wildfire. There have been multiple accounts of people encountering these strange circles formed by 12 dots and stretching almost 150 feet in diameter. Everyone wondered what could have created this. Was it a series of landmarks left by extraterrestrials or secret signals that we have yet to decipher? The leading theory is that these dotted circles are the remains of dynamite tests in the area. 12 dynamite explosives were placed in a large circle and detonated, leaving behind the craters that still mark the Sahara landscape today. Apparently, this was done to test whether there were oil reserves in the area. But we will never really know what the story behind these intensely strange, anomalous markings is. Number 1. Ancient communist relics. All movie villains have creepy, secret hideouts that can be found in the most unexpected places. But as we recently learned, the remote mountains of Bulgaria are home to a huge structure that once served as a monument to the Soviet regime and was a life-size representation of the communist regime in the area. Buzluja Peak was the scene of many epic battles, but ultimately it was used as a conference point for many socialist thinkers to meet about the future of the Soviet Union. After this, a huge circular structure was erected here to commemorate the communist government, and its construction began in the 1970s. The Buzluja monument stands solitary atop the desolate mountain like a ghostly sentinel standing guard over a forgotten past. Its imposing form looms eerily against the sky, a huge concrete saucer seemingly frozen in time. Brave urban explorers have attempted to gain access to its interior, and as they approach the monument, the chill of the surrounding fog is tangible. Now seems to glow ominously over the remote Balkan mountains. The walls are adorned with faded murals and slogans of once very powerful communist leaders. But be careful, as this decaying building is no longer structurally safe at all, and it is forbidden to explore it. And this is definitely one of the most ominous and creepy things you can stumble upon in the middle of nowhere. Be sure to check out our other videos on screen right now before you go. See you next time.